Business owners and professionals, I've got a question for you, and it's likely one that you're not thinking about at this moment, but you should be. So, what do the shootings at the Annunciation Catholic Church, the Manhattan office building that houses the NFL, the homes of the Minnesota State Representative and State Senator, and the shooting of the CEO of a major health insurance company have in common? And yet, we're not talking about guns, we know that. And also, we're really not talking about gun control here. That's for other people to discuss. What I'm after is grievance. And when it comes to preventing workplace violence, grievance-driven violence is an entirely different league. And here's why. Unlike the other types of workplace violence, grievance-driven violence involves extensive planning by those who carry them out. If you think about it, the shooter in Minneapolis at the church prepared for days. So too did the shooter that drove all the way from Las Vegas, Nevada to Manhattan to try to storm the offices of the NFL. In each of those different circumstances, there was extensive planning that went into this. And that makes these types of workplace violence incidents much more difficult to prevent. So this video is for business owners and professionals who are looking for ways to keep your employees safer, to keep yourself safer, and even your family safer. Because this type of workplace violence can happen at the workplace, it can happen at your own home, and it can happen when you're out in the community. In this video, we're going to talk about why that is in further detail and in depth, and we'll look at some options for ways to approach that so that you can address the grievance-driven violence in a way that really is beneficial to your employees, to yourselves, and even your families. Hi, I'm Mike Corwin, and I spent 30 years working as an investigator for attorneys investigating violent incidents. I learned how they occur and how they could have been prevented by doing so. And I also spent 15 years teaching personal safety and self-defense, where I implemented techniques that I myself developed while working in some pretty unsafe areas. If you want to learn more about grievance-driven violence, I have a lot of posts on my website at www.mikecorwin.com. All right, so I talked about the fact that what separates grievance-driven workplace violence from other types of violence is the preparation. What we're talking about is people that develop manifestos. They travel, they visit their sites, they do diagrams, they do research, they take the time to purchase their weapons, and for the most part, those weapons are purchased legally. They develop a very systematic approach to this violence. Yes, that's really cold and calculating, and that's what separates it from other types of workplace violence. There isn't an in-the-moment heated action that occurs here. There is straight up cold, calculating, planned action. All right, so let's start by looking at the Annunciation Catholic Church shooting, where the shooter visited the location. She did what we used to call reconnaissance work. She had been a former student there. She knew the location. She knew the schedules that they operated on. So she planned her entire attack based upon this knowledge that she had. The similarities between the shooting at the Annunciation Catholic Church and the Covenant School in Nashville back in 2023 are remarkable. Both of these shooters had been students at the location. Both kept a manifesto with what they were doing, not necessarily why. They don't always explain the why, but basically laying out their grievances, because these really are driven by grievance, as to why these shootings were going to take place, why they were targeting innocent children. So, as a business owner, when your typical workplace violence might be stewing between coworkers, there might be something building up, an argument that gets out of control, or maybe there's a robbery that occurs in the parking lot of your workplace from somebody within the community. It could also be a heated domestic violence incident involving one of your employees that spills over to the workplace. Or it could be what I like to call an invitee, which is somebody that comes to your workplace because that's what they're supposed to do. It can be a customer, a client, a patient, even a vendor or a contractor. And those people, maybe they get into a fight, maybe things get heated. That type of workplace violence is what we typically talk about. But now, and this is going back to when I first noticed it back during COVID, is this grievance-driven violence. People that are holding businesses, business owners, legal professionals, doctors, accountable for a slight, real or perceived. And the way that they're taking this action is they're planning out an attack, and then they're carrying out that attack with efficiency. And that's really what makes this different. Think about the Nevada shooter driving all of the way to Manhattan. It took him about 3 days, and he had planned it. He had purchased his firearms. He knew exactly where the location was. But think about this. When he went in to do that shooting, he really had no intention of coming out. He had prepared a suicide note. He walked openly carrying his firearms right into the building. There was a police officer there. There was security there. He didn't care. He went right in, fired the shots that he did, and worked his progression towards the NFL offices. Now, he did not get there, but if you think about what was driving his grievances, he believed he came down with CTE, a very serious closed head trauma disease or caused disease that happens in football because of the repeated impacts that you sustain. He believed that the NFL, which marketed and pushed football, is one of the reasons that he started so young and ended up with what he believes is CTE. Now keep in mind, they don't confirm CTE until autopsy, and so far I have not heard publicly, at least, whether that was the case. You can look at both of the shootings in Minneapolis and also in Nashville and look at the fact that these former students had prepared drawings as to window openings, doors, hallways, where students might be located, where faculty might be located. And in the case of the Minneapolis shooter, went there prior to the shooting in order to conduct even further reconnaissance, and of course was observed and left. But that gives you an indication of the detail in the planning. It's almost as if they're planning for warfare. Now, one of the differences is yes, soldiers can die during the heat of a battle, but they don't go in thinking that's the case. In many of these grievance-driven acts of violence, the perpetrator has no interest in surviving. Matter of fact, they usually shoot themselves before the police get there. So their mentality is not to do this and get away with it, although I will say that the shooter, the CEO of United Healthcare, had created an elaborate approach to get away from the situation, but I think even in the end, he knew he wasn't going to get away with it. Okay, so what are we talking about dealing with this type of violence that makes it so different? Okay, one, you don't even know that these people are out there. They may or may not have had an interaction with your company. In the case of the NFL, they had no idea who this shooter was that drove all the way in from Nevada. They had no clue who this guy was. Maybe he sent them a letter, but chances are pretty good they did not know who he was. The shooter that shot the CEO of United Healthcare, United Healthcare had no clue who this guy was. The shooter had no clue. You look at it and you think maybe this was a targeted hit by something very personal, but it wasn't. It was somebody with a grievance towards healthcare companies, and particularly health insurance companies, but This was not specific to United Healthcare. This was not specific to the CEO of United Healthcare. So this is somebody who held a grudge from a distance and not based on interaction. That expands the pool of people that could be engaged in this type of violence. If you think about it, anybody who's angry at, let's say, the chemicals in the dry cleaning industry could target a dry cleaning store simply because that's the one closest to where they are. With the school shooters, it's a little different. Just like in Uvalde and in Parkland, these were former students that engaged in this level of violence. But think about the total number of former students that Parkland High School had, that Uvalde had, that this church in Minneapolis had. There's quite a few students over the years that have gone there. So it's a very broad stroke. And for somebody who hasn't engaged with the school in many, many years, even thinking that somebody out there is manifesting this type of anger, this type of hatred, this type of grievance towards them is kind of not something you would think about. It's really not on your radar. So let's look at a quick contrast between this grievance-based violence, which is really carefully planned out, and the other more emotional-based or completely unconnected type of workplace violence that can happen. So for example, your workplace parking lot, guys that go ahead and steal catalytic converters can be in your parking lot, let's say later in the day where there's fewer cars, or even in the middle of the day, and somebody sees them trying to steal a catalytic converter, walks up. It's not unlike the actor that was working as a bartender, came down to see guys who were actually stealing the catalytic converter from his car and shot him. Now, he thought they were trying to tow his car, but that type of thing is quick, it's fast, it's not planned, it's not strategized. You've also got, as I mentioned, your coworker violence, and your easiest way to deal with that type of stuff is as soon as it surfaces, you have your HR staff, you conduct an internal investigation, you make it an effective one that instills confidence in both parties that you're doing everything fairly, equitably, and you're just getting to the truth. That type of investigation can work wonders at preventing coworker violence. And what about invitee violence? Kind of the same thing. With invitee violence, once you know who the invitee is, there's processes that you can do. So for example, you can escort any visitor, have whoever they're coming to see, make sure that they were expecting them, have them come up and then walk that person back so that they're not roaming around your workplace. If you've got somebody coming in, make sure everybody signs a log when they enter so that you know who's there. You assign them a visitor's badge. Those types of things are very straightforward to do, and they're very effective. And finally, with domestic violence situations, most of those types of attacks occur at one specific location. And that is, not all of them, but most of them occur in the parking lot, because the attacker knows where your employee's car is parked, what her shift is, and what her vehicle looks like, so they can approach that vehicle and literally just wait for her and then shoot her. Now that's a little bit more planning, but oftentimes it occurs because there's an argument. There's an argument at the car. Maybe somebody wants extra money for the month, something like that, but there's an argument, and then that becomes heated, and that's where the violence starts. When it comes to this grievance-driven violence, it's the opposite. It's cold, calculating, thoroughly planned, and often with the intent of the attacker then taking their own life before law enforcement gets there. Business owners, professionals, you all have to think about this type of thing, because it also sets up a different place where the violence can occur. So the CEO of United Healthcare was walking down the streets in Manhattan on his way to a conference. He had stopped and gotten coffee and was on his way to a conference. The shooter had figured out which locations to stake out to be able to catch him, let him walk right past him, and then just shot him right from behind. The senator and the representative from the state houses in Minnesota, that person came right to the door of both houses consecutively, right? They approached the house, and the shooter was willing to shoot other people that were in the residence. So it wasn't just targeted at this one person or at these two people in their respective homes. The shooter didn't just target the people with this perceived grievance. As a matter of fact, the shooter shot people who were in the household as well. So when you think about that, this is very broad brush, and this was meant to be very effective. When you look at the two schools, and in particular the church in Minneapolis, this person had initially tried to access through the door, but during Mass they locked the door. So the person went to the window and started firing through the window to the inside. This was not somebody who was inside and going from room to room, but literally standing right outside the building, shooting right through a window into whoever this person could hit. Okay, so what kinds of approaches are going to be more likely to help you prevent, or what we're really talking about is the physical harm and the harm that comes from these types of attacks? What types of trainings can you do? What types of mindset should you and your employees have towards these types of attacks? Well, the first thing is to be honest and say, okay, it's not likely that such an attack is going to occur to me, but it's possible. And once something is possible, then you can figure out how to prepare for it. If you dismiss it and say, oh, come on, that's not going to happen to me, you, your staff, your family, going to be completely unprepared for when this happens. Now, keep in mind a couple of things. All of the ones that I cited involved a firearm, but there's plenty of grievance-based attacks that are purely physical, that the only weapon they have are their hands and their feet. There are others that occur with knives, so you can't just go, okay, it's a gun, so we need to understand mass shootings. Not really. Okay, that's really not how you go ahead and prevent this type of thing. There's a few misconceptions about these mass shootings that we need to talk about. The first is you can't harden the target against these types of attacks. Look at the church in Minnesota. They had the door locked. It was mass. They were not expecting anybody to come in the building. They had practiced shooting drills. They had done active shooter work, but not within the church itself. They had done it for the classrooms, figuring that's where things would occur. Now, myself personally, I've trained preschools and church security staff, and people are more likely to be able to enter where there's a sanctuary than just when there's the classrooms, which typically are more isolated from there and less open to the public. But it didn't matter whether they had practiced this or not, because the shooter shot through an outside window. What you saw was quick reactions from faculty and students about getting down, right? Getting out of the way, covering each other. They just basically went right into instinct. And programming our fight or flight skills is a really good approach to take when it comes to this type of workplace violence prevention. We need to be able to react. We need to be able to not get paralysis by analysis. You need to just respond, get to safety as quickly as possible, whatever that means, and then worry about the other stuff later. Now, when you're dealing with grievance-driven violence, if that person did in any way reach out, whether it is a letter to the company, an email, something that puts this person on your radar, you've got to act on that, right? Don't dismiss it and go, it's somebody blowing off steam, or haters are going to hate, big deal. No. Okay. For YouTube, that might be the case, but for violence, workplace violence, driven by grievance, you have to take any of that kind of threat very seriously. You need to alert law enforcement at that point, and you need to create a vigilance process. Now, notice how I didn't say set up security cameras. Security cameras have to be monitored 24/7 to be effective. Otherwise, they're good for evidence after the fact, but they're not preventative. So you need to be able to give your staff, yourself included, your family, whether it's at your home, the ability to recognize in advance that a threat is unfolding so that actions can be taken. If you're looking at the United Healthcare, there was a lot of discussions about why this guy didn't bring his security team. First of all, most of you business owners and professionals don't have the resources for a security team or a 24-hour bodyguard staff. You just don't have it. So you've got to rely on yourself. You've got to rely on your employees. You've got to rely on your family for you and for them to be safe. And vigilance is an easy thing to put into practice. It just requires doing it. Now you can do a little stuff like taking out a video camera and looking at your surroundings and kind of, speaking out loud, identifying what you're seeing, what you're hearing, where light locations are, where doors are, where windows are, vehicle traffic, all that kind of stuff, just to practice getting your brain to do it. But in the end, you're being aware of your surroundings and the people within it is your best way to keep safe. So one of the other issues that comes up with workplace violence is that when we typically think about it, we think about coworker on coworker workplace violence. That's a mistake, right? If that's your mindset, you've got to shift that right now, because most workplace violence is not coworker involved. It is not employee on employee or supervisor on employee, etc. It's not that way. That's in reality, that's 25% of all workplace violence. So the other 75% involves people who are either not present at that location or people not even on your radar. So you lose the ability to control a situation that starts to get out of hand through discipline. Yes, you can discipline both coworkers if they're escalating a feud between them. But if somebody walks in from the community and shoots, you don't have the ability to do anything with that. So these are a few of the differences where it comes to this grievance-driven violence that's very different from your more traditional workplace violence. And on top of that, what makes it so much more difficult to prevent? So it's up to you. The average attack is over in seconds. If it's a physical attack, it can just be 7 seconds. If it's a shooting at a workplace, it can be 30 seconds. But the average attack is over in just a matter of seconds. Nationwide, the average response for law enforcement to an violent emergency situation is 10 minutes. You have seconds, you have 10 minutes. That's a huge discrepancy in the time that you are there. So you can't rely on law enforcement to keep you safe. Just like most employers don't have money for bodyguards and a security team, you can't rely on law enforcement either. So one of the things that you can do is train yourself in situational awareness. You can train yourself in certain amounts of self-defense that can be applied in dangerous situations. And in particular, when dealing with these grievance type things that occur quickly, you get out of the way and then you might need to engage. They talk about the only thing that's good to me about live shooter training. I'm talking about get rid of the smoke, get rid of the flashing lights, get rid of the noise. All that stuff doesn't help. Yeah, the concept is that you're putting people into a feeling of what it's like to be in one of those situations. But that's not going to do it. If you want to teach him how to take that gun. If you want to teach him how to find a safe hiding spot. If you want to teach somebody, how about where to hide behind a door so that one, they don't shoot through the door, and two, they don't trap you behind the door and then shoot you. So all of these types of things require a different mindset. And where I think that you can really make strides in terms of keeping yourself safe is to focus on the more basic things, to visualize these types of attacks, how they occur. Do they occur with somebody coming in from the parking lot? Do they occur with somebody coming inside the office and being at the reception area? All those different types of things. Or worst case scenario, just when you're out walking in the community. And if you think about this for the CEO of United Healthcare, he lived in Minneapolis. Their corporate office was in Minneapolis. He was at a conference in New York when he was gunned down. This is completely out of his area, right? This is not anywhere near his location. So obviously this is a person whose guard would be dropped. But in reality, the best thing you can do is to never drop your guard. All right, so I just wanted to touch about what I see as the biggest safety concern for business owners and professionals, and that's grievance-driven violence, because if you think about it, you are the brand for your company, or you represent an industry that somebody can have an issue with. As a matter of fact, that person doesn't have to have any connections to your business. They can just be a member of the community. So you have to be prepared at all times. Now, there's vigilance and there's going too far and not engaging in the world around you. And as business owners and professionals, you need to engage every day. So don't let the fact that these types of attacks occur keep you from doing what you need to do each day. If you want to learn more about grievance-driven violence, I have a lot of posts on my website at www.mikecorwin.com. There's also about the other 4 source types of workplace violence. There's some personal safety tips for business owners and professionals. I spent 15 years training people in personal safety, so you'll find some very useful tips. And because I spent 30 years preparing cases for attorneys, plaintiff attorneys will find information on how to conduct investigations for litigation. So things like witness interviews, things like locating witnesses, things like using public records to your benefit to prove or disprove a fact or to impeach someone. So go ahead and get yourself to my website, www.mikecorwin.com. And I look forward to seeing you next week.